The short answer, no. I don't think there is a government in Israel that believes in two-state solution. I can't say, again, Israel is in the midst of another attempt to form a government, which one doubts if it's going to happen before a fifth election within around 2 years. But there are no forces there that really genuinely believe in the compromises that need to form a two-state solution. The Oslo Accords are by now 27, approaching 20 years old, and they need to be updated to the current conditions. But if you look at the last election, if you take Benjamin Netanyahu out of the equation, there is a solid majority of the right in Israel which opposes two-state solution.
I saw a headline just before we were chatting saying only negotiations can bring lasting peace to Israel and Palestine. That headline, as we both know, could have been written 60 years ago. Managing the conflict hasn't come up with a solution, which makes me think neither side really wants one badly enough. Is that true or is that cynical?
Not cynical at all. I would argue that these headlines could be repeated every single day since 1948. And it hasn't happened between the Israel and Palestinians. No one is going to win a war between the Israel and Palestinians. And let me even put it in striker terms. If anyone will win this war, it will be such a calamity that no one wants actually to experience. It will be another catastrophe. So the only way to reach an agreement which is viable, is genuine, is just and fair, is around the negotiation table, which addresses the two-state solution, in other words, self-determination both for Jews and Palestinians. Jerusalem is the capital of both, a just and fair solution for the refugee issue, and security for everyone between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
Is another possibility that Palestinian militants, together with their backers, such as perhaps Iran, maybe Turkey, have been waiting for an excuse to provoke a new confrontation, a fresh confrontation with Israel?
Yeah, but what are they going to win out of it? Maybe 5 minutes of fame. At the end of the day, Israel is a very strong country. The military power, it's backed up by the United States. It just can prolong the clashes. It can prolong the bloodshed. And both sides would suffer. And probably the Palestinians will suffer even more. This is not the answer. I think a smart policy on the Israeli side and its allies is to look for a political solution that will remove the pretext that the extremists are using right now. Don't play into the hands of Hamas or the Islamic Jihad. Play into the hands of those who want coexistence and reconciliation. Don't look at the Palestinian society as homogeneous society. No, there is diversity between those who want to live in peace and the time. Even Hamas is not a homogeneous movement. So we need to be much smarter about approaching, by the way, not only the Palestinians, but also Iran.
One of the more controversial parts of the Israeli attack was the destruction of a 12-story building in Gaza City that housed the US Associated Press and also Al Jazeera. Israel said the building was a legitimate military target. The White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, immediately tweeted, "We have communicated directly to the Israelis that ensuring the safety and security of journalists and independent media is a paramount security." What do you make of the decision to target that building?
So, I was pondering about it. Was it the kind of what happened to the United States in Belgrade with the Chinese embassy back during the war there? In Kosovo, intelligence mistake, or it's a deliberate signaling to someone, to the press, to others, that everyone is a fair target. I hope this is not the case, because this is really changes the rules of the games. Targeting journalists in a way that really can endanger their lives, because the idea that you warn people doesn't mean that they have enough time to evacuate. Luckily, they did. This is not fair game to attack journalists. I would argue there are not people there that are not fair game. Children, women, generally civilians. But yeah, this is changing a little bit the rules of the game. And if Israel deliberately did it, it deserves all condemnation.
Now, I understand the US may well have sent an envoy, but for the moment, the Egyptians and the Qataris have been trying to broker peace or a ceasefire. What would they be working on? Would they be suggesting some kind of peace offer, giving Gaza an airport or even some ports to help lessen this tension within Gaza?
I think it's important, as you indicate, that Mr. Hadi Amr is in the region. He's an experienced State Department official. He knows the in and outs of this conflict, maybe more than anyone else in the State Department. So this is very important that he is there and try to negotiate ceasefire. But the role of regional broker, always important. That's what happened in the past. The problem with that is all this excitement and all these efforts are confined until a ceasefire is achieved. But when you need to deal with the long term, which is the most important to avert and prevent the next round of violence, then it's where it stops. So ceasefire now is paramount, because this will save lots of life and also the trauma and the even loss of more trust in the long term. But the minute that the ceasefire is achieved, it's important actually to look at how the blockade is removed, letting more outlets for commodities from Gaza to the West Bank and beyond. Let more people travel inside and outside Gaza. Make, in other words, life more livable in Gaza. That will go some way towards trying slowly to build different relations between Israel and Gaza, and hopefully with the Palestinians as a whole.
The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has described the situation as, quite rightly, utterly appalling, and he's called for an immediate end to the fighting. He also added the UN is actively engaging all sides, he says, towards an immediate ceasefire, and he's called on stakeholders too to allow mediation efforts to intensify and, he says, succeed. Does the UN really have any teeth to force a ceasefire, or is this rhetoric, diplomatic rhetoric?
I will put the question back to you. What's the point in having the UN Security Council if it can't stop such a conflict?
Yeah.
This is the reason that, you look at the UN Charter, you look at the Geneva Accord. This is all about ensuring, one, that wars are averted, prevented, or stopped as quickly as possible. And then when the sides conduct the war, they adhere to certain rules. Now, you look at the Security Council meets, and it's not Mr. Guterres' fault. It's the fault of the members of the Security Council, and mainly the permanent members. And we see it in Syria, we see it in other places, the inability to reach an agreement to stop wars. I think in this sense, they should take responsibility. And I think the pressure will be there. I think as long as you have always at least one country among the permanent members that will stop a resolution, it undermines the Security Council and undermines the entire idea of the security system which the UN is based upon.
There seems to be a general ignoring of this conflict, especially from Israeli politicians. The issue of the Palestinians didn't feature prominently, did it at all, in any of the 4 recent elections that Israel has recently held. And the timing suggests perhaps a political advantage to Mr. Netanyahu?
Yeah, I would argue there are some suggestions that Netanyahu engineered it. I think in the bigger picture, is 12 years consecutively in power, not together 15, contributed the situation they are in. At the same time, I don't think he engineered specifically this round of violence, but no one is better in Israel politics, and I put better in inverted comma, in exploiting this situation. You know exactly, in his very desperate time to stay in power and to stay probably out of jail, how to play the game here in order to either form still a government led by him or more likely a 5th election. So yeah, I think that the end result of his 12 years now in power is what we see right now. It's not to say that the Palestinians shouldn't take responsibility, and we shouldn't tolerate rockets flying all over Israel, but we need to look at the underlying causes that lead to this situation.
And is Mr. Netanyahu basically benefiting from the divide between the West Bank and Gaza? Lastly, Professor Meckelberg, I mean, where do we go from here?
If to judge by his efforts to not to allow election or to make everything to undermine election, a Palestinian election, including not allowing East Jerusalemites, Palestinians, that are not citizens of Israel, despite the fact that East Jerusalem was annexed many years ago by Israel, is part of his undermining any reconciliation between the Fatah and Hamas, between the West Bank and Gaza, because he thinks it serves Israel interest. I would argue, A, that he is wrong, and B, the Fatah and Hamas shouldn't fall into this trap. But here we are, we do.